A reprieve for steel workers at Tata's plants in the UK. Unions and bosses strike a deal. A 5-year commitment to Port Talbot and other plants. Unions say thousands of jobs could be saved.
To secure a 2-furnace operation, to secure a 5-year commitment, to secure the future investment is very significant.
But workers still have to take a vote on changes to their pensions. Also tonight, the Syrian army retakes Aleppo's old city from rebel forces after 4 years.
You can see what heavy fighting there's been. You can still smell the explosives in this area recaptured yesterday. The Syrian army and its allies are now scenting victory.
A BBC investigation finds a 5-fold increase in the number of patients waiting in A&E for a hospital bed in England. Britain's working poor. Why are nearly 4 million people living in poverty despite having a job? And making it all add up, the new museum which aims to show why maths matters.
In the south, a final farewell to HMS Illustrious. Thousands watch her leave Portsmouth en route to a Turkish scrapyard. And an appeal for help. Metal rods in Robin's spine now threaten the teenager's life.
Good evening. Thousands of jobs at Tata Steelworks in Port Talbot and elsewhere look secure tonight after unions and management hammered out a deal, ending months of uncertainty. The company had put the business up for sale in March. As part of the new deal, the company's promised to invest £1 billion in the Port Talbot plant and to keep 2 blast furnaces working for at least 5 years. In return, the workforce is being asked to accept less generous pensions. The agreement will now be voted on by the workers. Our Wales correspondent Sian Lloyd reports from Port Talbot.
It's been a dark year for the workforce at Port Talbot. But as dawn broke over the steel plant this morning, there was a glimmer of hope that a more certain future could be on the horizon. The blast furnaces have kept on working, but no one knew for how long. In March, its owner Tata wanted to sell all its UK business, but the pension liability was a stumbling block for prospective buyers. Today's announcement comes after months of negotiations between the company and union representatives. So what is the proposal that unions will take to their members? There's a commitment by the company to running the 2 blast furnaces at Port Talbot for at least 5 years, a 10-year £1 billion investment plan, a commitment to try to avoid compulsory redundancies for at least 5 years, but Tata would consult on closing the British Steel pension plan and replacing it with a defined contribution scheme.
There's a question mark, and the workforce will make the decision whether it's acceptable at the end of the day. But Tata are saying there's no way they could support the British Steel pension and the future investment needed.
53 now, so retirement's not too far away, I was hoping.
Andrew O'Connor has worked at the plant for 32 years. Like other staff, tonight he has a lot to think about.
It's positive news in many respects. You know, the investment is much needed in the plant. It'll secure our future, plus the pledge that there's not going to be any hard redundancies for 5 years. But the pension side of it, you know, it's quite an emotive issue with a lot of people. Feelings are running quite high about the pension at the moment, so I wouldn't like to predict which way a ballot would go.
Over the past year, Tata have made hundreds of redundancies and in the past few months have seen a change of leader at the very top of the organisation. The meeting that took place here earlier today went down to the wire. It's now for the company to sell its proposal to the workforce. From planned sale to now making an offer of security, Tata have in effect made a U-turn.
You would recognize that it has been an extremely difficult time for Tata Steel in terms of financial performance last year, and since then many things have changed. One is that there is a transformation plan that has started working.
The uncertainty has been felt by the local community too. People have built businesses and their livelihoods around the plant.
It's not just steelworks is there, it's the contractors that go in. And like myself, I rely on the contractors and the steel company.
Tata's annual Christmas party for workers and their children went ahead as usual last night. Families here have now been offered a more certain future, but they're not celebrating yet. Sian Lloyd, BBC News, Port Talbot.
Let's talk about this a little bit more with our business editor, Simon Jack. Simon, back in March, it looked like this company didn't have a future in the UK, and now that's all changed. Why?
It does seem a million miles away from where we were earlier this year when I, among others, stood outside the plant gates, and things look pretty grim for the 4,000 workers there and thousands more around the country. So what's changed? Well, quite a lot, including the economics of the steel industry. If I can just show you what happened to the price of what Tata actually makes. Now, back in January 2015, the price of steel per tonne was £355. Go forward a year to the beginning of this year, and that had fallen all the way to £250, losing £1 million a day. Fast forward to today, and that price has gone up by 70% to £435, actually making an operating profit. So that's helped a lot. Plus, of course, it became a big political priority to save these steel jobs. Some changes at the top, as Sian said in her piece, Tata has changed the priorities. All of those combined have led to this outcome. Now, having said all that, there is still a price to pay in terms of pensions. 130,000 pension scheme members. That scheme will be shut. Future workers will get less generous benefits. Is that a price worth paying for previous workers, for future workers? What I'm hearing from unions, the answer to that is a resounding yes.
Simon, thanks very much. Syrian government forces have made a significant incursion into eastern Aleppo, which has been in rebel hands for 4 years. They've now taken the historic old city and are closing in on the rest, leaving tens of thousands of civilians trapped in ever smaller areas. In an unusual joint statement, Western nations have condemned the Syrian government and Russia for causing a humanitarian disaster. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, reports from western Aleppo.
In the dead of night, a terrifying escape. A hole smashed through the wall of somebody's house, their only way out. These families ran for their lives across front lines, bringing the oldest and the youngest with them. Relief to have survived the terrible fighting in the old city of Aleppo, but frightened, not knowing what comes next. For now, buses are taking them to a makeshift camp set up by the government. By morning, Syrian state TV had news from their correspondent at the gates of the historic heart of the city. All of it is back in government hands. This is what Aleppo looks like in the wake of battle. Today, the army took us to the neighborhood they seized to clear the way for today's breakthrough. The Syrian army now has the upper hand. The rebels are in retreat.
They are in very bad shape and they are flying from one place to another, so they cannot fight anymore.
How long do you think it will take, General Frost, to take all of them?
I cannot give you a time, but I think it will not be for a long, long time.
It's been a rapid advance in just 3 weeks for the army and its Russian and Iranian allies, but rebel forces still aren't giving up the fight. Districts held by the rebels for the past 4 years continue to fall, but you can see what heavy fighting there's been. You can still smell the explosives in this area recaptured yesterday. The Syrian army and its allies are now scenting victory. They're not listening to calls for truces, not even pauses. Not when they believe that all of the city of Aleppo will be theirs within weeks, if not sooner. As fighting intensifies in East Aleppo, so too does the pain. More and more casualties from ferocious bombardment. Death haunts these streets.
I don't have the words to describe what we are living through. No one has endured anything quite like this. We could die at any moment.
There's suffering on the other side too. In this government hospital, the stretchers arrive one after another, victims of the dozens of mortars and rockets fired every day by the rebels. Far fewer casualties than in the east, but the pain is still raw.
We were hit by 4 or 5 mortars. My father is injured also. I am injured. Most of the people of Aleppo were hit in this war. Each family lost someone.
Aleppo. A small part of this city is still in rebel hands, including hardline fighters linked to Al-Qaeda. Today, President Assad said the battle here is a huge step towards victory. But he admits the war isn't over. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Aleppo.
There's more evidence today of the pressure on the NHS in England. A BBC investigation has found that in the last year, nearly 500,000 patients requiring the most urgent care had to wait for more than 4 hours for a bed on a ward. That's a 5-fold increase over the course of 5 years. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports.
Patients coming through A&E may need to be admitted to hospital, but for an increasing number, finding a bed on a ward is more difficult. Waits are getting longer.
It was a nightmare.
Rupert Nathan has a history of heart problems. In June, he developed chest pains and called an ambulance, fearing he was having a heart attack. But after getting to hospital and being told he'd be admitted for tests, he still had to wait more than 5 hours.
I should have been seen straight away, not made to wait.
And how were you feeling while you were waiting?
I was really very worried. The pain was so great that I felt that I mightn't see the next morning.
BBC analysis of NHS England figures shows an increasing number of patients enduring long waits on trolleys or chairs before being assigned a bed. 11% of emergency patients had to wait over 4 hours last year. That's a big jump from 2011, when just 2.7% were experiencing long waits. Last year, nearly 500,000 people were kept more than 4 hours before a bed was available. Delays for patients waiting to be found beds in hospitals are part of the overall strain currently being felt right across the NHS. So how can it be dealt with? Well, this hospital has found new ways to manage patients from the moment they arrive. At Kingsmill Hospital in Mansfield, it's made very clear to people where they should go. Just inside the door, there's a separate area for GPs to treat those who aren't seriously ill. That cuts down the numbers moving into the hospital needing beds. Meanwhile, social workers sit alongside NHS staff. They're planning the speedy transfer of elderly patients back to the community as soon as they're well enough.
We can maybe look at getting you home.
That in turn frees up beds. Working with local community leaders, they've moved from having some of the longest waits to being one of the best performers.
It's in the context of removing the normal organisational boundaries, so we've thought what is best for patients here. These little things, when you join them up and line them up, deliver a significant change.
The Department of Health said the vast majority of patients were admitted quickly. There aren't comparable figures for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but data does suggest pressure in all NHS hospitals. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Mansfield.
Rescue workers in the northern Indonesian province of Aceh are searching for survivors after a powerful earthquake killed nearly 100 people in the early hours of this morning. The Indonesian authorities say the 6.5 magnitude quake damaged hundreds of buildings in the same area that was devastated by the Boxing Day tsunami back in 2004. A Pakistan International Airlines plane carrying almost 50 people has crashed just north of the capital, Islamabad, with no survivors. Pictures from the scene reveal a trail of wreckage in flames on a mountain. The national airline has been accused of safety failures in the past, though it's unclear what caused this particular crash. The Brexit appeal at the Supreme Court has been hearing from Scotland's most senior legal officer today. He's been arguing that because Scotland will be affected by the UK leaving the EU, the Scottish Parliament, not just Westminster, should be consulted before negotiations begin with the EU under Article 50. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, has been watching proceedings.
Inside the Supreme Court in London, they're hearing arguments about how the UK should leave the EU from all 4 home nations. With the Scottish Government claiming not only that there should be a vote in Westminster before Article 50 is invoked, but also insisting there's a constitutional convention which says there should be a vote in the Scottish Parliament as well.
There is plenty of evidence, including statements by the United Kingdom government, which I've referred to in my case, about the importance of this convention to the working of the devolution settlement. The United Kingdom has been...
I'm sure the convention, conventions are incredibly important, but
indeed,
they're not legally binding, that's their nature.
Indeed, and what I can also say is that the United Kingdom Parliament decided that this convention should be enacted into statute.
The court also heard submissions from Northern Ireland.
The giving of an Article 50 notice will frustrate the purpose and intention of the Northern Ireland Act,
arguing that Brexit could unlawfully affect the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. Since the Scottish Parliament was opened by the Queen, there has been a convention that if Westminster wants to legislate on devolved matters, they first seek the consent of the Scottish Parliament. That's why, today, the Scottish Government are arguing if there is to be a vote in Westminster on Article 50, there should also be one in the Scottish Parliament, because leaving the EU affects so many of the policy areas that are controlled by Holyrood. Lord Sewell, a former Scottish Office Minister, devised the Sewell Convention, which describes when the Scottish Parliament should be allowed to have its say. He believes that because Holyrood has no power over foreign policy, there's no need for them to have a vote on Brexit.
The 1998 Act says that foreign affairs, and specifically matters to dealing with the European communities and the European institutions, is reserved, whereas the Convention deals purely and simply with devolved matters.
Scotland voted to stay in the EU by a substantial majority, 62% for Remain. If they get the chance, the Scottish Parliament is likely to vote against triggering Article 50. But Holyrood does not have a veto. They cannot stop the UK leaving the EU. It would be politically explosive if the Scottish Parliament votes against triggering Article 50, but Westminster decides to ignore it and go ahead anyway. Nothing like that's ever happened before, and the SNP would use it to strengthen their arguments for a second referendum on Scottish independence. Of course, if the Supreme Court decides the Scottish Parliament does not get to have a vote on Brexit, that will be politically inflammatory too. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
In Parliament today, MPs voted overwhelmingly in favour of the government's timetable for leaving the European Union. 461 MPs backed the plan, while 89 voted against it. In return, the government has accepted an opposition amendment to publish its plans before then on how Brexit will be carried out. A man's been found guilty of the racially aggravated harassment of the Labour MP Luciana Berger. The MP for Liverpool Wavertree was sent anti-Semitic abuse in 5 blogs written by 24-year-old Joshua Bonehill-Payne from Somerset in 2014. Ms Berger called the online tirade horrific and said she felt sick and very much under attack from what was posted. New powers are to come into force in England and Wales to help protect people from being stalked. It comes as the number of stalking offences reported to police increased by more than 1,000 in the past year. New protection orders will be used to stop stalkers from approaching victims or sending them messages, and could result in jail if they're broken. There are nearly 4 million people in Britain still living in poverty, despite being in work. According to research by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that's a record figure. People are classified as poor if they have to make ends meet on less than 60% of the average income, or about £14,500 a year for a couple with no children. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
Mark Payne lives just outside Glasgow. Delivery driver, 3 children, earning £12,500 a year. A member of a growing band of the working poor. High food costs, high rents, frozen benefits. A toxic mix for those who are only just about managing.
All the cost of living's getting higher, but wages have probably stagnated for the last 7-8 years, maybe more. And it just makes it harder for trying to budget week on week. Food shopping, utility bills, all that kind of stuff. So see all different costs comes up, birthdays, and especially this time Christmas, and at this moment in time I have no clue where Christmas is coming from.
This is the picture of the UK's working poor. There are now 31.7 million people who have a job in Britain, a record. But of those, 3.8 million are below the official poverty line. For a single person, that means earning less than £7,300 a year. More than 12% of the working population, 1 in every 8, is classed as in poverty.
More people are in work,
but that means that we're having more people in those low-paid jobs, but also not able to get enough hours to actually get the money for the household, and particularly if you're balancing caring for children, for older people, for disabled people, it can be very hard to get that balance right.
If you're just managing...
Concern about the just managing classes goes to the very top.
I know you're working around the clock. I know you're doing your best, and I know that sometimes life can be a struggle.
Globalization is associated with low wages, with insecure jobs, with stateless corporations, and striking inequalities.
Two people who have staked their reputations on creating an economy that works for all, which it isn't at the moment.
This is the major issue at the top of every politician's in tray, the people who feel left behind. The government's actually been quite successful dealing with absolute poverty. People in workless households, employment is at record rates. But when it comes to in-work poverty, it's almost undermining that very British statement, an honest day's pay for an honest day's work.
Usually what happens is...
Cynthia Ganesh-Panchen runs a charity in Leicester. Its food bank was launched for people out of work. Now the employed on low wages are coming through the door.
The promise we've been given, I think, generation after generation, if you work hard, you will have a decent life. And I think that promise is which is broken, because no longer people who work hard are having access to that decent life which was promised to us.
Time to act. In partnership, many argue, the government and businesses investing in training, building affordable homes, paying more, creating a wealthier economy which can be shared more widely. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
The commander of the US-led military coalition in Iraq says it could take another 2 months to recapture the city of Mosul from so-called Islamic State. The coalition is providing support to Iraqi security forces and Kurdish fighters in the offensive, which began almost 2 months ago. Since then, the UN says 84,000 people have fled their homes, and medical teams in the city of Erbil say they're facing a disastrous level of civilian casualties. From northern Iraq, Orla Guerin reports.
Beneath the blanket, he is missing both arms. This young boy was the victim of an IS car bomb. Another wounded civilian gets stitched up without anaesthetic, the best they can do at the main emergency hospital in Erbil. And here a soldier wounded in battle against the militants. Doctors say IS snipers have been focusing on the children. Much of the suffering in Mosul goes unseen, but here in this hospital you really get a sense of the cost of the operation against IS. Those who are seriously wounded but survive are brought here for treatment. This man has just come in. Doctors are struggling to cope with the volume of new arrivals, and they're preparing for more. Staff here have already received more than 100 casualties in just 2 days.
The operation theater, it's full. Like, there are 2 cases, they passed away yesterday just because of lack of place in the operation theater, because there was no room to get operated on them. Sometimes we even choose those that have a chance to live and we let the other pass by. This is how it goes on. And
on the road to Mosul, the traffic of war, military vehicles going in, and ambulances streaming out. The faces here are testament to the tragedy unfolding in the city.
A mortar landed on my house. My mom, my wife, my son were gone in one night. I'm on my way to collect my wife's body. We are completely destroyed. Enough! Enough!
Inside Mosul, civilians are caught between the Iraqi army and the militants. Here, troops distribute food supplies. It's an anxious wait. There's only one truck of aid. In the queue, we met a father of 4, Ahmed Idris.
We have no food, no gas, no water, and it's very cold.
we are worried that the battle will take a long time and many people will die, not from the war, but from hunger.
For some trapped in Mosul, the Iraqi advance appears painfully slow. Elite army units have been suffering heavy losses, prizing this city from the death grip of IS. And the battle for Mosul looks set to grind on well into the new year. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Northern Iraq.
Even before he's become president, Donald Trump has been named Time magazine's Person of the Year for 2016. He'll be inaugurated as America's 45th leader in January. Mr. Trump was one of 11 contenders for the title, including Nigel Farage, which the magazine described as the 52-year-old soothsayer with the arsonist's grin. Britain's last operational aircraft carrier, HMS Illustrious, has set sail for the last time from Portsmouth. After 32 years and 900,000 miles, the 22,000-ton ship is being scrapped and will be recycled at a plant in Turkey. Crowds of people lined up to watch her leave on her final voyage. A new generation of carriers are currently being built, with the first going into service next year. The pharmaceutical firm Pfizer has been fined a record £84 million for overcharging the NHS for an anti-epilepsy drug. The US company raised the price of the medicine, taken by tens of thousands of patients across the UK, by over 2,500%. The increase by Pfizer and distributor Flynn Pharma resulted in the competition watchdog imposing its largest ever penalty. Emma Simpson has more.
It's one of the world's biggest drug companies. For decades, it's made an epilepsy drug called Epanutin, used by 48,000 patients in the UK. Here's how it soared in price. In 2012, Pfizer sold the distribution rights of the drug to Flynn Pharma, a UK company. Its brand name was removed and therefore not subject to price controls. The companies whacked the prices up. Overnight, a 100-milligram packet went from just under £3 to more than £67. The price tag for the NHS, an extra £48 million. The NHS had no option but to pay up because epilepsy patients usually shouldn't be switched to other products. In other words, there was no choice, and that's why the competition watchdog went after them.
Well, we have imposed the highest fine in British competition history on Pfizer, and that's because we take this extremely seriously. The victims of this are the NHS, which is all of us as taxpayers, and all of us as users of the NHS who find money is being spent on this rather than on services we would want.
Pfizer rejects the findings, saying, "In this transaction and in all of our business operations, we approach this divestment with integrity and believe it fully complies with established competition law." It plans to appeal, as does Flynn Pharma. The watchdog says 4 other cases are being looked at, but legislation is already making its way through Parliament, which should see this loophole closed. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
A new mathematics gallery, co-designed by Dame Zaha Hadid, opens at the Science Museum in London tomorrow, with the aim of showing the importance of maths in our lives. The gallery is the architect's first project to open in Britain since her death earlier this year. The design is based on mathematical principles. Our arts editor, Will Gompitz, went to see it.
The late architect Zaha Hadid was a mathematics graduate and a master of the unexpected, which explains, perhaps, why the first thing you encounter when walking into the Science Museum's new maths gallery is a 1929 Handley Page biplane.
We decided to position the plane in the center of the gallery, and then everything else came from that, the air moving around the plane, and it's sort of like a graphical representation of that movement. So the floor layout that you see, the way the objects are scattered around, actually they follow the lines of the floor.
This is a gallery trying to solve its own problem, which is to take a subject, perceived by some as dry and abstract, and turn it into an attraction. But why does maths, which is so central to all our lives, supposedly have an image problem?
I think one of the troubles is our education system, which really compartmentalises subjects. So you go from mathematics to the physics to the history to the music lesson. And I think a gallery like this is actually trying to break down those barriers. So you actually see, oh no, mathematics is part of music, of architecture. It has a history. And I think you can see that in things like the Le Corbusier chair. He's using mathematics as a way to create art.
The new £5 million space has created the opportunity to look at maths from a variety of perspectives.
We don't tell enough stories about female mathematicians, so it's exciting to be in the gallery to see some of them highlighted and at least be able to see some of their mathematics. So for example, we've got the Enigma machine here, which was used during the war for encryption and code breaking, and of course famously was at Bletchley Park, which is full of women.
The gallery has prioritised storytelling over hard maths, illustrating innovation with marvellous machines like this, a 1952 London School of Economics teaching aid, where water equates to money. Its only shortcoming was, unlike this gallery, it didn't take account of human behaviour. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
Are the French trying to steal our banks? Tonight we'll hear from Paris as to how they're certainly rolling out the post-Brexit red carpet for city firms. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.